I think it's safe to say that part of our emergency response effort is sheltering. For members, it seems that our meeting houses become a magnet in times of disasters, particularly in areas internationally, areas like Haiti, perhaps the Philippines. I certainly know in Japan, when these kinds of disasters happen and members have nowhere else to go, they generally will go to our buildings and look for shelter there. As much as we might want to assist in providing the kind of mass sheltering that we're talking about this morning, we realize, however, that it is not an easy thing. And in areas like ours, that kind of mass sheltering is generally discouraged. Why is that? Well, sometimes we don't have the size facility like this one really to provide mass sheltering. We certainly know that we don't have the food preparation facilities or even the sanitation facilities to provide for that kind of sheltering response. I think even more than that, however, is I think as a people, we may not be adequately prepared right at the moment that help is needed to be able to provide it in a manner that will be beneficial to those who need the help and will be a positive experience to our members. Now, for all of these reasons, and although all of these things can certainly be overcome, and they've been overcome as the church is providing housing throughout the world, we're generally counseled to use our meeting houses, particularly in areas like this, only as secondary sources of housing when all other sources are unavailable or insufficient to meet the needs of the community. Here is what the church policy states. While the use of a meeting house as a temporary community shelter may occasionally be needed, a church building generally should not be the first choice. Other community facilities are better suited to accommodate the lodging of large numbers of people. Sometimes wards or states are approached by local organization desiring to enter into a pre-disaster agreement. Such agreements are not recommended. Now, nevertheless, and notwithstanding this policy, there are instances when it will be appropriate to use our buildings for mass sheltering. And here is the policy that pertains to that. Again, taken from the guidelines for building use, and you can find all of these guidelines and principles on lds.org in the resource section, emergency response. It states, permission to use a meeting house as an emergency shelter is granted by the stake president after consultation with a member of the presidency of the 70. Priesthood leaders should involve the facilities manager when a meeting house is used for this purpose. And so a meeting house may be used. That use must always be approved by a member of the presidency of the 70, and generally that can be facilitated by talking to one of our area 70s, such as Elder Davis. What if an emergency is so significant that you can't reach a member of the First Quorum of the 70 or one of the local area 70s? What then is the stake president supposed to do? I called the church welfare department and asked this same question, and this is the response that I received. Certainly a stake president has the discretion to make that decision, and there will be times when he has to make that decision perhaps without this required consultation. That doesn't happen very often. I think here in San Diego at one time, I remember Elder Haney explaining that one of your buildings here during the fires that you had in San Diego was used to lodge National Guard members, and that decision had to be made prior to receiving approval, consulting with a member of 70. But I was told, talking to the welfare department, that in their experience through the years, dealing with all of the kind of emergencies and situations that we've talked about, some of these are devastating, that in nearly every case, the church will be able to reach us and not to worry about our reaching them. Now, in this same policy, there are other guidelines relative to building use, and these are some of them. When a meeting house is used by a community agency, word of wisdom and other standards should be observed in the building and on surrounding church property. That only makes sense. The chaplain offices are not to be used except for church purposes. Cooking equipment and heaters that are not part of the meeting house furnishings may not be used in the building. Pets are not allowed in the building except for service animals. The stake president or bishop should assign a priesthood holder to be present at all times the building is used by another organization. And I know, at least in the agreement that we have in the Red Cross, it's mandatory that the church representative always have the authority to make the final decision with respect to the use of the building. So that person should always be here. And finally, if we do use our building with a community agency, there is a hold harmless agreement that should be signed. And with the American Cross, we have a special American Red Cross shelter agreement form, which I won't talk about today, but which you can again find on lds.org. And so these are the policies that we have with respect to using our buildings as shelters. Now let me stress that our buildings may be used, as we know and as we've witnessed from Sister Davis's excellent talk and testimony, for other than mass sheltering purposes. They can certainly be used to house, or at least to support, the tent communities that might grow up during a response. They can certainly be used to house other emergency personnel and to provide other emergency functions, such as an emergency command center. And they can be used as points of distribution. Now, a point of distribution is where a government agency, such as the Red Cross, County Red Cross, will come into the building and use it for the distribution, for example, of medical supplies. In Orange County, we have two of our buildings, one in Placentia and one in Anaheim, that are qualified to serve as a point of distribution, which they call a pod. This isn't something that we volunteer for, it's something that is selected by the community. And so far, those buildings have been used probably every 3 years to provide flu shots for the individuals that live in that community. It's been an excellent arrangement. It's helped our people to become involved with the local health agency and other first responders. And I think except for a large box that they're required to keep that has some of the emergency supplies that they need in one of the rooms in the building, there has really been no downside to this. But again, it requires the permission, if we use our buildings for any of those purposes, of a member of the area presidency. Now, having said all this, and so as not to encroach on Mr. Rosen's time, let me offer just 3 suggestions, if I might, based upon our experience. And I offer these suggestions having had, again, no personal experience with mass housing in any of our buildings, but having listened to experts like Mr. Rosen and testimonies like Sister Davis's, and visited with many people throughout the world who have been involved in these kinds of emergencies, to feel very comfortable about these kinds of suggestions. The first suggestion would be this: even if we never use our buildings, our meeting houses, for mass sheltering purposes, I believe it's absolutely critical that we include shelter planning in all of our emergency plans. I think this is easy to overlook, really, because we may just assume that, oh, we'll never use our building for a mass shelter facility. The Red Cross will go elsewhere. There are other things that are available. Our buildings really aren't designed. It's easy to overlook this. Let me just suggest 3 or 4 applications. I think number 1 is the most obvious. Emergency preparation, the very foundation of it, is the principle of sheltering in place. That if homes are still able to be used, then we want people to stay in their own homes. And that is going to happen only if they're prepared to stay in their own homes. The homes may be stable, they may be able to stay there, but if they don't have adequate food and water and other commodities to sustain them, particularly in that period of time before the first responders will arrive, and in many instances that could be several days. Unfortunately, we found around the country that it could be several weeks. They're not going to be able to stay in their own homes and do in-house sheltering until they're prepared. And so everything that we do in emergency response begins, in my opinion, with this initial emphasis on personal preparation and having these supplies on hand. Secondly, I think it's important to encourage our members in their own family plans to include provisions for going elsewhere if they need to leave their homes to find sheltering. It may be with family, it may be with friends, it may be with other members in the ward, but that should be a part of their plans. If their home is uninhabitable, where are they going to go? It's something they really need to think about. Now, to take that a step further, I think it's possible that leaders in the wards and stakes may be able to organize members to receive those that come in who need housing ahead of time. I know we have some stakes in Orange County that have sent out questionnaires asking if they would be willing to open their home and what kind of limitations that they might have if the need arises to bring people in who have been devastated by these kinds of situations. One instance, as I remember, here again when you experienced the very severe fires down here in San Diego, this happened in the San Clemente stake up in Orange County. This may have been members who were devastated and non-members living in the Pendleton area, which is adjacent to San Clemente, but there are many individuals who needed housing. At that time, the San Clemente stake was approached. I think they held a meeting right in this building to see if they could provide member housing. And they did that, and it worked out extremely well to allow individuals to come up and to stay in the homes of members. They weren't organized to do that at this time, but they are now organized that should that happen again, they can easily accommodate those members in members' housing in the wards and throughout their stake. The only problem I understand that they ran into, and this is where the advanced planning again becomes so very important, is there are some individuals that were scheduled to be housed who had pets that the members were not prepared for. Again, the Lord opened up a way. There were pet shelters available where they could locate those pets, and those people were easily accommodated. Now finally, and I think this is going to be the scope of Mr. Rosen's focus today, if nothing else, we can train and encourage our people to become trained in these sheltering principles, to become volunteers, to go to locations that are opened up by the Red Cross or by others where their services will be desperately needed. As Mr. Rosen explained in his prior talk, the Red Cross depends heavily on local volunteers, and I think in the past, the church has such a marvelous history of providing volunteers that the more people that we can prepare and train to be able to do that outside of our buildings, just in the community generally, becomes a great help to the Red Cross and a great blessing to our church, and I'll let Mr. Rosen speak more about that. Now secondly, in addition to including sheltering in our planning, I believe that we need to think about the possibility of using our buildings, our meeting houses as mass shelters. And my recommendation is that the way that you prepare to do that is partner with the Red Cross. They are the real experts in this area. They know what this is all about, and it saves us a tremendous amount of work. As I mentioned, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Red Cross. It's a marvelous document. It certainly talks about the blood drives that we've been doing with the Red Cross for years and years and years, and we will continue to do a terrific undertaking, but it really is much broader than that, and it is really much broader than just providing sheltering. Here are three provisions that I think are very important. Community and preparedness. Each organization, we're talking about the church and the Red Cross, through its local units, that's us, will explore opportunities to work collaboratively, including community preparedness. Make community preparedness information and training available to support each organization's efforts to create prepared communities. And then there's a marvelous attachment to this that talks about some of the services that the Red Cross can provide with respect to CPR training, readiness training, which our members may take, and it will help them become much better prepared. And I don't know if Mr. Rosen will have time to speak about that, but some of our people have taken advantage of this in Orange County, and it's really a wonderful thing. Number two, disaster planning. Actively participate in reviewing state and local emergency operation plans to coordinate participation, maximize timely and comprehensive service to the community, and mitigate duplication of effort. And here are the possibilities. cooperative training, drills, or other planning activities. We've done in Orange County drills with the Red Cross. They brought their truck over, they've opened it up, they've assisted us in shelter planning that we've done. It's been marvelous. Identify facilities or other premises that may be suitable for sheltering, warehousing, and other collaborative disaster-related activities. When we first read this in Orange County, well, this is great. We're immediately going to go to the Red Cross and we're going to get all of our buildings in select parts of the community set up as Red Cross shelters. And we were proceeding down this road and we were very happy about it until I received a call from Salt Lake and said, remember the one guideline that you shouldn't enter into any sheltering agreements without approval, and that approval will generally not come until there's a disaster. And so we have backed off. It's a little bit confusing in a way when we're encouraged to work with the Red Cross and we want to provide sheltering, and yet we have some limitations. But I don't really think, as we've thought through this, that it's really a limitation. I'll explain that in just a moment. Finally, we have this important area of volunteer involvement. Encourage participating in training disaster release volunteers for response efforts, whether for collaborative or individual release efforts. This is so critically important, and we have so many members that would benefit from this training, both for the community and for their families. Now, back to my original question. How do we bring together our desire to have our buildings prepared and our desire to work with the Red Cross within the guidelines provided by the church? And I think part of the answer is this. The Red Cross offers several models for sheltering. They have their Red Cross managed model, which the Red Cross basically does everything. They take over the building, except for the rules that we have and our ultimate control of the building, but they run everything. The volunteers, the operations, we just get out of their way. I suppose there may be some members that would like to volunteer and assist with that, but this is strictly Red Cross. There's the Red Cross partnered plan, which is very similar, except we sponsor it in association with the Red Cross, and we provide more volunteers. And then we have the Red Cross supported plan. That's where we maintain control of our buildings, and the Red Cross provides management and direction and training, hopefully ahead of time. Now in Orange County, we've used a hybrid of the Red Cross partnered and the Red Cross supported. We've done the training. The Red Cross has been very helpful in all of our buildings. We have manuals that are used for sheltering based upon the Red Cross materials that they've so graciously allowed us to use, and our people have been trained. And so this model for us has worked out extremely well, except for one caveat that I'll add here as I close. And so there are ways that we can be prepared in our planning to use our buildings without making the ultimate initial commitment that when there isn't a disaster, the Red Cross will look to our buildings as their first place of refuge. I think it's clear, and I've talked to Mr. Rosen about this, that our buildings really become secondary sources after all other sources have been exhausted. Now again, all of these materials are available on lds.org if you'd like to read them in more detail. As people are released and as things change, the training can be quickly forgotten. The location of the books in the stake president's office will go from the top shelf to a drawer in the bottom cabinet, and when the need arises, it seems like we begin all over again. And so I confess that, at least in our county, that we're probably starting this process of retraining our people. And this is a constant retraining process that has to occur with sheltering. It is a major effort. It takes a lot of work, but I know at least one thing that immediately comes from this is the improved relationship with organizations like the Red Cross, better preparation of our members as they take advantage of this training for volunteerism. And I think overall, our members will still be prepared. Many of them will still remember the things that they've learned when the need arises. Let me close just with one final slide. I think this ties into what Elder Davis talked about to us in his excellent talk this morning. This is counsel given by President Uchtdorf in October 2011 General Conference. If you're like me, 7 years ago when I received this calling, I sat there and I thought, wow, where do I begin? What do I do? Here's what Elder President Uchtdorf would advise us. And this was in the priesthood meeting, so I'll add to this a little bit. Brethren and sisters, study the revealed principles and doctrines first. Familiarize yourself with the modern welfare program of the church. Let me add this. The church in the last 4 or 5 years has tremendously improved LDS.org and their emergency response and resources section. It is light years better than it was 6 years ago, and I encourage you to look at it. There is such a marvelous outline of the things that we need to do to become involved in this. Once you have studied the doctrines and principles of the church-wide welfare plan, seek to apply what you have learned to the needs of those within your stewardship. What this means that in large measure, I like this, you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. Isn't that great? Every family, every congregation, every area of the world is different. There is no one-size-fits-all answer in church welfare. You're going to have to chart a course that is consistent with the Lord's doctrine and matches the circumstances of your geographic area. To implement divine welfare principles, you need not always look to Salt Lake City. Instead, you need to look into the handbooks, into your heart, and into heaven. Trust the Lord's inspiration and follow His way. In the end, you must do in your area what disciples of Christ have done in every dispensation. Counsel together, like we're doing this morning. Use all resources available. Seek the inspiration of the Holy Ghost. Ask the Lord for His confirmation. And this is a great part. And then roll up your sleeves and go to work. And I think that's what this is all about. These meetings, I think, assist us in doing that. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I feel, honestly, as I've reviewed things that have happened down here in San Diego and the Imperial Counties, and I'm really speaking to the choir this morning, you certainly know a lot about this matter of responding to disasters because you've had some down here. You've done a marvelous job, and I salute you. I salute all members of the church who are so involved in this area. It's a wonderful opportunity to serve and to give back to others and to serve the Lord in these capacities. I leave my testimony with you of the divinity and the importance of this work, and I do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.